product people really hate or don't want to do. Okay, so I have a little list. One is that they don't like prescriptive rules, right, because they curb their creativity. They don't really like complexity. Some of it, of course, kind of has to be there, but they prefer not to make it worse. Another one is no PM I know wants to be a funnel for stakeholders' ideas. That's really the big problem that prevents people from getting really great improvements and really get great product delivery, development delivery, is that we manage in parts. So product lives in its own world, and engineering lives in its own world, and delivery is someplace else entirely. And one cannot succeed without all the others. Implicit belief that we can have best practices and a standard process that will work well regardless of who we happen to have on staff. Okay, so really process before people. Another belief we're missing in all of this is that they will only do good work to the extent that the system encourages them to.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Untrapping Product Teams. Today we have Gil Broza, the author of Deliver Better Results. So Gil, very happy to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome, I'm glad you are here. So maybe you could introduce yourself for those watching or listening to us.
Sure. I live in beautiful Toronto, Canada. I have an independent practice for helping companies get better at product development. In the last 20 years, I've helped over 100 companies, and I've yet to be sued. Should point that out. I've had clients in almost every field, so I have a wide perspective on tech value delivery, and so I can see some patterns, both good and bad. People tell me my superpower is that I make the complex simple and the implicit explicit so they can make better choices. I've written 4 original books, and something I will never do is prescribe the single right way.
Good. Great introduction. And when you say you make the complex simple, maybe that's how I got to know you. Because once I start writing my book, I started addressing exactly these. And Jim Highsmith told me about you and your new book. And said, oh, okay, so we better talk then.
I had the honor or privilege of having Jim write forwards for the first 2 books.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim is a great guy, and when he connected us, I got excited about your book and everything. And now, looking at your book, you wrote already other books, so you know the trouble that is to get a book out.
Oh, yes.
So what motivated you to get to a new one?
Okay. So product development organizations are still not as great as they can be and as they deserve to be. And this is 2024, right? We're not having this conversation at the beginning of the millennium, right? We've had so many advances, and still we have piles of challenges, big ones. Development is getting faster, but products are not necessarily getting better. Workers, team members don't seem to be more engaged than they used to be. And the race to be first, or just to dominate, or just to stay relevant, is not getting any slower. But nowadays, leaders in technology development, when they want to improve things or they need to improve them, there's so much available to them, it gets paralyzing. But they also have some crucial blind spots, and they don't have a roadmap for gradual sustainable improvement. I mean, people don't really use the big scary word transformation as much as they used to, which never really worked well. And on the other hand, you can say, well, we'll do a retrospective, little bits of continuous improvement. Yeah, that's not good enough. It's good, but not good enough. So I wanted to share what I have seen that really worked.
What really worked. Yeah, and it's funny, as you say, it's 2024, we're having this conversation. Because today I had lunch with a friend, and she shared with me that one of her clients is struggling with releasing the product, and they have yearly release. And I said, 2024, yearly release, that happens.
And it's a struggle.
And it is a struggle, and it is a pain, and sometimes people don't know how to solve that.
Yes. So one of the blind spots is, we probably have a process problem, or we have a technology problem. We need to build a pipeline. We need to hire this guy or that girl. No, there's something else going on there. Yes.
Something that's true. One thing about your book that I like, when I was reading it, I remember I told you I didn't have a lot of time to go through, and you told me just go through the first chapter if you don't have time. And the truth is, once I read the first chapter, there was loads of value in it. And I was surprised. It was really engaging and valuable. So I wonder how you made this choice to make it available, the first chapter.
Okay, so we're giving this to our listeners or watchers, right? So anybody who's interested in this chapter, and I'll explain in a moment what you're getting there, go to a URL called heardonpodcast.deliverbetterresultsbook.com, right? So it's like in English, heardonpodcast.deliverbetterresultsbook.com. This chapter is written to satisfy two use cases. The first one is to just get the reader interested in what's happening there. So it gives the big picture, whereas the other chapters go into the details and the specific how-tos and whatnot. But the other use case is when somebody reads it and says, wow, boy, I wish my boss could read this. And maybe they even get a copy. Maybe they even give a copy to the boss. And boss says, I don't have time, because senior managers in technology never have time, right? There's so much happening to them and around them. And so the use case is, take it. It's only 20 minutes. Just read chapter 1. The idea is to help people start to think differently about the situation they're in and what it will take to make it better. And again, the other 200 pages are, okay, so what specifically? Without prescribing. That was the other challenge. How not to prescribe. I am seriously allergic to, I think I said this in the introduction, prescribing the one right way. Your setup, your team topology, your process, your whatnot should look like so. No. The book actually describes how to strategically evolve your system of value delivery, and you would instantiate it with whatever makes sense for you to deliver the right product to the right customer at the right time. And if that happens to be waterfall, go for it. Oh, likely it won't, right? But then you instantiate it with what makes sense to you, and it may not fit one of the frameworks, or it may. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be right for you.
Yeah. And I can confirm, once I read that, I was thinking, I would give this book to a few people because it would help them think differently. What I especially like is there's no right way. There are things you need to consider and you need to address them. So it's strategic. And one of the aspects you mention a lot is the value delivery system.
Yes.
And I see this as fundamental because many times we start talking about which framework are we going to use? How do we apply this framework? But then you come from a different perspective. You are talking about the value delivery system. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. So the value delivery system is a term that I introduced in the book because as an industry, we don't have a good name for it. Maybe somebody has a better one. I would love to hear it. I actually asked. I asked a lot of people. So it's this construct that is bigger than the team and it is smaller than the whole company. And it's all the people and how they work from idea to delivery to produce something that makes a difference to your customers and therefore the business. And when I say it's bigger than the team, smaller than the company, it's basically anybody who contributes to making the thing happen. The thing can be a product or a solution or whatnot. And the analogy I give that people seem to relate well to is think movies. At the end of a movie, you get the credits. And the credits are not just the actors and the producer and the writer. The credits also talk about the people who painted stuff and moved stuff around, and also the people who signed checks. That's also important. Okay? All of them affect the final result. So for our case, it's, product people and engineers, delivery, content writers, designers, probably more. And we kind of know that they're there, but we don't act that way. That's really the big problem that prevents people from getting really great improvements and really get great at product delivery, development and delivery, is that we manage in parts. So product lives in its own world, and engineering lives in its own world, and delivery is someplace else entirely. And one cannot succeed without all the others. And yet we pretend that they do because we kind of have interfaces between them and we do the throw over the wall type of thing. Even if we put them in agile teams, we still throw over the wall. And that doesn't really help us create great results.
No, I agree. And what happened is a battle. I call it us versus them. And if what is happening is us versus them, you know what happens? Nobody wins. Everybody loses. That's what I learned.
And so we end up in all sorts of awful patterns like, engineering being order takers for product, or product just being constantly terrified that their good ideas will not see the light of day, but instead the bad ones will. All sorts of things that can happen. But again, one part, function, specialty, whatever, cannot succeed without the others.
True. Because it's a collaborative game. And what happens in what you're describing is there are many pieces, and sometimes these pieces, instead of figuring out how they connect, actually it is friction. So creating interfaces.
Yes.
And if you have interfaces like what you mentioned, like the order taker, engineering, and it's hard to succeed. And then what you are suggesting then with the book is to come up with a value delivery system.
Yeah,
focus on.
Right. So you don't really come up with it, but you identify the one that you actually have, but never quite saw that way, right? Because you have it. Now, what makes it a system is also that decisions, this is really the big deal, decisions made in one place will have ramifications everywhere else. And not in the value stream kind of way where you think work just flows downstream. So if product prioritizes A over B, developers will work on A rather than B and blah, blah, blah. So you can see the connection. But no, anytime a developer makes a decision, that will have ramifications to product. Anytime delivery changes some things, that will have ramifications on customer service, right? Of course, when design, for instance, doing design after you do requirements, right? That's the age-old thing. We still do that, right? But don't form and function kind of go together, right? And once you get to the actual implementation, the choices people will make, the developers will make, of course, go back and have effect. And this is the trouble. And we got to do something about it. So the book is all about, well, how can we do some things to it that will actually make it better rather than solve locally or go with the popular or familiar or certifiable, which is not always what we need in our context.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned, which resonates with me, is you need to recognize the value delivery system you have, because you have something in place, which is true. Yeah. So let's start with that. And I guess once you recognize that, you're going to face some common mistakes. And then you could correct them to something better. And I wonder if you could share something you stumbled upon or throughout your journey, common mistakes on the value delivery system.
Okay. So in terms of how people act, you mean?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So we already talked about the one big mistake, that not really realizing that things do occur in a network style in a system and what are the implications of that. So just to say one more thing there, one hallmark of systems is feedback loops. Okay, so you do one thing and that causes a reaction, which causes another reaction. And sometimes those reactions come back to you and they may create good effects. They may be positive. That's like a virtuous cycle. They may create bad effects. That's a vicious cycle. And sometimes their effects compound and make things either really great or really terrible. Okay, and so again, when we have a reductionist worldview of here are the parts, here are the sequence elements, we lose that. Another thing that is a very common mistake is this still, implicit belief that we can have best practices and a standard process that will work well regardless of who we happen to have on staff. Okay, so really process before people. Waterfall tried to be this way. CMMI tried to be this way. Some of the Agile frameworks act that way, in that, okay, if you do your process just so, you can expect success. However, your system is made up of human beings, and human beings will basically do what they do, right? Whatever the process says. And that might work out well, or it might not. Okay? You may have very bright people on staff, some of whom very much like to follow the process as described. Okay? But their colleagues, maybe they like to color outside the lines. They don't like to be told. They think they know better. In many cases, they're right. Now what happens to your standardized process, right? So when leaders actively put people first, which is really apparent in decision making, then you have a chance of really getting great results out of the system, as opposed to the theoretical limit of the standardized process. That's one thing. And the third thing, yeah, go ahead.
Yep, this. No, it just stuck with me, but I want to hear the third thing. But when you say about the processes, it is shocking that even today we're so focused on the processes. It's kind of you're trying to industrialize how we create digital products.
Yes.
And then we hit the wall very, very fast.
Yes. And when you think about it, various parts of the system actually need to behave differently. For instance, your continuous delivery pipelines, right? They are more suitable for lean thinking, right? Because you don't want variety there. You want the thing to go to production consistently. However, what should we work on, right? Which comes up in product and in development. You probably want to allow variety, because variety is the sauce of life. But if you standardize that as well, you're going to get into trouble. Okay?
Yeah, very much.
And so the third thing I was going to say that is still a super common mistake is not realizing the huge effect the choice making has on our outcomes. Let me explain. You can have at the tactical level of your way of working, the process you use, the practices you use, the roles that you've assigned, the artifacts that you use, your templates in Jira, your meetings, your whatnot. So all of these are tactical. We usually call them process, but it's really like tactics. There's a better term. But how we execute has to do with what we optimize for, has to do with our worldview, and has to do with principles that we fall back on. But those three things I just mentioned, together they make up mindset, right? Not the psychological type of mindset, but the practical mindset of how do I choose? So if I'm in a demo meeting and the stakeholders have not shown up and there's like really nobody to get feedback from, what do I do? Scrum doesn't tell me what to do then, right? Or if I'm in a retro and people are not speaking up, what do I do? The process doesn't tell me. I fall back on principles and my beliefs and my values, and hopefully those values are shared. And the thing is that you can execute the same tactic with a different mindset. You will get different outcomes. So an example I really love to give is how my first two books were made into audio. So in both cases, I hired a studio. In both cases, we had a fixed price contract. But the first studio, you could tell that fixed price meant maximize profits. So when they sent me the recording at the end and they said, hey, what should we change? And I gave them a whole list. They said, no, we're not changing it. Because clearly it would eat into the profits. They did fix mistakes, that they did. But anything else, they said, no, trust us. We know. We've done this before. We're good. And so one of the outcomes was a very unhappy customer. The book is good, but I was unhappy and I did not want to work with them again. But the second studio that did my earlier book, from the get-go, we said, no, everything is changeable. And we actually came up with a process that was like the most agile process you can imagine for producing audiobooks, which is a bit of a strange thing when you think about it. And not only did it come out great, I was happy. I gave her a testimonial. She still has it on her homepage. And if I ever make another book into audio, I'm talking to her again. And the fascinating thing about this is practically a controlled experiment because it's the same customer and same work, same type of work, practically the same deliverables, but executed differently because of the different choices. In the first case, fixed price came first and quality second. In the other case, it was listener experience first. And that drove different outcomes. And leaders don't realize this. They don't realize that their tactical things, that the process is just the tip of the iceberg.
And it's a dangerous tip of the iceberg, actually.
Yes.
Because if our attention goes there, then value will be something a bit more complicated to deliver. And they start changing what value is in this case, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because what I say sometimes when I see that, I consult companies and I try looking what they are doing. And the moment I realize this focus on processes and frameworks and all of these that you mentioned, I say that will limit your team to doers. So they will do what the process allow them to do. Some people will try, as you said, coloring outside the line, but not everyone will accept because the process doesn't allow them to do so. But if you want them to be achievers, you need to give better flexibility. And for that, you need to set the direction and then let them figure out how to get there.
Agreed.
That's what I have seen. And now I'm also creating my audiobook, so I'm more on the second experience. So that's how I chose the narrator.
Okay.
So yeah, because I was also paying very close attention. I wanted to go the extra mile because there was an audition.
Yeah.
And I was between a few people and I said, all right, I want to see more. And I noticed the one actually I liked the most in the beginning, this when I gave a bigger chunk of the book to read, it was different than I would expect. And I could see it was maximized for time optimization, while the other actually invested quite considerable time in improving the storytelling. It was a very different listening experience.
Yeah, so speaking about value, when the studios did the audition and they gave me a short list, I actually made the recordings of the samples available, and I asked my followers in the newsletter and on LinkedIn and whatever, basically market testing. And sure enough, the votes came in 50-50.
I know that because I had a similar situation. I didn't share it so, let's say, broadly, but I approached some of the beta readers and people closer to me, around 20 people. But it was really 50-50. And then in the end, I said, now I need to make the call.
Yeah, I mean, it does, come down to what we say, right? So.
Yeah. In the end, it is about how you want to transport the message and how do you want that to be communicated and so on. But it's learning, right? But when we go back to the product world, we're talking here also about process, outputs, and so on. One of the things that I notice, the teams are improving. Teams know how to deliver feature. We have many things today. It becomes easier to work on the delivery aspect of features. But then when we look at the bottom line, what did we create? That question, many teams struggle, and then they wonder, how do we get out?
Yeah. How do we get better value? Absolutely. So it really goes back to, again, this movie analogy where you say, okay, so who and what contribute to the end product? And again, we typically fall into the trap of, well, I have these 2 product managers and I have these 20 developers and so on, but maybe there's more going on here. So if you kind of map the inputs to your product and the effects and what tends to survive going through several people and what tends to get shut down and all of that, then you realize that there's more going on here than somebody running an experiment or just putting stuff in Jira, right? And it's bigger than that. What I find super useful in this context is to follow this up by actually articulating those beliefs and values that I mentioned before. I called beliefs worldview, but it's the same thing. It's basically our set of assumptions about how things are about our customers, about the technology, about where the market's going. All the stuff that we take for granted, but never actually question. And we act as if it's true, although we don't know for a fact that it's true. And the other thing is the values, which is, again, what we optimize our way of working for. So, for instance, traditionally and in many, many places, what they really optimize for is predictability. You know what you'll get in a few months, right? Another thing they optimize for is people's busyness. We want people to be working. Okay, we don't want them sitting idle or, God forbid, collaborating, right? So you want to articulate what are the de facto beliefs and values, because they are your paradigm. And the paradigm can only get you so far. So if you realize that that is putting an upper bound on your results, you might want to have a different paradigm. Okay, so like I was saying with the audiobook, the fundamental belief, and really the producer said this in her own words. She said, Gil, assume everything is changeable. We went into this with this one statement, very clear, and that resulted in a whole new process. By the way, it also resulted in a lot more work for me in listening to everything and giving feedback and re-listening after they fixed it and whatever, but it was in service of better results. I was willing to take that. And I also told her, if I ask for too many changes, I'll pay you the hourly rate for some extras, because that would be the fair thing to do. But if our paradigm is, no, we got to run fast. We got to pressure people, otherwise they wouldn't do the work. We got to nail the budget down, or else. That will limit how far we can go. As simple as that.
Yeah. Two things here, what you say. The paradigm, I think it's something we simply don't talk about it.
Not at all.
Oh. And it's surprisingly important, because this thing, I worked in factory in the beginning of my career. I was a software engineer helping automating processes. And I remember there were two kinds of employees, the productive ones and the non-productive ones. So I wasn't the non-productive employee, and my success metric was helping the productive employees become more productive. But that was a factory, and that's how they measure success. But it's different, because in a factory, indeed, you can repeat the process because you are creating the same product. I wouldn't think it's the best way of working. That's another thing. But this paradigm, it was implicit, not explicit.
Yes.
And then I moved to other places. I saw the same in agency.
Yes.
Sometimes I would say, hey, we need to get the software engineers to observe a customer interview. The customer would directly come with the hammer and, hey, I'm not paying for that. That guy codes. I said, if you want that guy to code right, that guy needs to understand your customer. I said, no, it's your job, not that. I said that then it's a proxy thing.
Yes.
So
two words I like to use in this context are intentional and explicit. So you mentioned the explicit. It's usually not the case. Our paradigm is implicit, right? It's based on how we've been going so far. It's based on copying what other companies are doing. It's based on what people learned in their previous companies. And then what happens there is that it's also not intentional. It's accidental. And this paradigm, by extension, it's the culture. And so it changes when you have new leaders come in. And it's always in flux. It's just, like governments and voting, right? Every 4 years, you get something different. But if you want to have better results, better be very explicit and intentional about how you're going to be, how you're going to work, how you're going to engage people, how you're going to improve things. Otherwise, again, what you get is accidental and incoherent, because it's not kind of aligned across people, and you won't get the best results.
Yeah. And I said I had 2 points, and this connects very much to my second point, which is quality is not cheap. Quality comes with a price, and there's no shortcut. Because what I see today, everyone is asking about the question, how do we get that fast? But you can get to value faster than you are getting right now, most probably by adapting some things. But it's not about taking shortcuts. When we started the conversation, you said the word transformation. That is anything but a sprint. You cannot drive such transformation, at least in my experience, from 1 week to another. It is gradual a transformation, and it will take some time. And I see the longing for shortcuts. Hence, deploying a big framework that promises you better results, but then you are surprised you
Well,
don't
that's
get
part
there.
of the paradigm, right? In our companies, we have this implicit belief that we have high smart people on staff, so they will do good work. What we're missing is a belief that says to do the right work, this goes back to what you said a few moments ago, to do the right work, they need to understand the customer, not just a proxy. Another belief we're missing in all of this is that they will only do good work to the extent that the system encourages them to. And if the system has all sorts of pressures that it places upon them, like through performance review, through promotion, through what you'll get to own, who you'll work with, your identity in a way, right? Because, in our field, we're very much attached to our work. All of these are pressures in the system that are invisible, and they definitely, modify how people behave. But this is this belief is not explicit in the paradigm of practically any organization, except maybe the few tier ones that we hear about, but there's like a dozen of them.
Yeah. I am to see a company that makes everything so explicit like that, which is necessary, having this conversation, make it clear, and then you can reflect on what helps you, what doesn't, and you can change.
Yes. And to be fair, leaders are super busy. They always have stuff to do, decisions to make, problems to fix, and whatnot. So a lot of what we're describing here is not a ball that they drop. It just tends to be a blind spot.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned about being a leader is there are many fires to take care. Many. Always. There are many fires. And you need to choose the ones you're going to engage with. And sometimes some things you let it burn. But what I learned from experience is if I try to take care of all the fires, everything is going to burn. So I need to learn how to delegate more, so people will take care of some fires that I will not care about it, because I know some people are looking at that prioritization and so on. So it's natural that within the amount of things happening, you are not going to see some things, and they will bite you later.
Yes. And so, a lot of leaders know that, and they want to delegate and whatnot, but they are blind to the fact that the delegation will, again, only be successful to the extent that the system doesn't discourage it. For instance, by who gets the credit? Who gets to stay overtime and get paid nothing for it? Right? So there's a lot going on here. It's not just, assigning tasks.
There is. No, that doesn't work. It is, there are some things I also learned is what you tolerate becomes the norm, and what you reward also becomes the norm. That's how cultures are born.
Yes.
Yeah. So a few times, for example, I noticed some employees working late at night, and then I dropped them a message. What's going on? Curious, what made you work so? And then I understood they felt pressure and so on. So let's address that. And then I said, hey, I noticed you are working so long. Why don't you take some time off just to compensate that? So recognize that, and they actually felt valued. They gave me this feedback, but I had to see this happening, because I was thinking, I don't want to drive a culture of people feeling pressured and working longer than necessary. I want to drive a culture where we feel valued and we can deliver value and so on, collaboratively, not under pressure. And let's speak up.
Yeah.
So that's learning. It's work in progress. Still learning. On this.
Yes. And, fortunately, there are a lot of people like us, so maybe we can make the world better.
Maybe. Yeah, that's true. And coming back to your book, I know that you focus more on the leadership because you touch more the value system and so on. But I do believe that your book brings value for PMs, product managers,
Yes.
product owners, these people working within product teams. And I want to get your perspective, how they can
Yes.
benefit from
And I
your
definitely
book.
don't want to assume that, the book is only for the engineering side of the house because, well, that's where I grew up, right? So that's definitely not the case. To answer your question, I actually want to start by chatting a little bit about what product people really hate or don't want to do. Okay, so I have a little list. One is they don't like prescriptive rules, right? Because they curb their creativity. They don't really like complexity. Some of it, of course, kind of has to be there, but they prefer not to make it worse. Another one is no PM I know wants to be a funnel for stakeholders' ideas, although they have to talk to the stakeholders.
Yeah.
But they also don't want to spell out every little thing. Right? Like those big Jira tickets. They don't want to solve the wrong user problems. They don't want to make big and risky bets on a regular basis. And they also don't want to disempower engineers. So
Yeah.
here's how this book will help them. In the book there's both the leadership foundation for making improvement sustainable, but then there are 10 strategies that you apply across the system, which includes product, to make things better. So those strategies will actually mean that there's a whole lot less of all those things we just said that product people don't like. For instance, with the understanding that it's, again, the system rather than individual parts that is responsible for results, there will be a lot more collaboration between product and the other players rather than seeing it, we're seeing product as the requirements giver or the upstream, right? And I also think that as a result, product will be treated more fairly, not expected to get every decision right? Because product's decisions have, wide impact. They're not going to get each and every decision right. Okay, so they also should not be assumed to be like the main reason for the product's success or failure. So that's one thing. Another one of the strategies talks about customizing the way of working to delivering what matters. When you do that, product is no longer at the mercy of whatever process engineering decides to adopt. Like, with Scrum, it almost always starts in engineering or IT, right? And product is kind of brought along if they're willing. That's not cool. Okay, you kind of need to select together, right? And also all sorts of elements of the way of working that are important to product, like experimenting or evolving or pivoting, are actually more likely to materialize and to remain in place because we kind of bake them into how we roll around here. It's not just something that maybe we will allow. Okay. More people will participate in decision making. The system will actively try to improve decision making. All of these will make product people's lives easier. The environment they'll be in will be more collaborative and more friendly, less blaming, because we're really all in this together. So, shared success, shared failure, but also shared attempts to make things better.
It's a lot of check marks to me when you started.
Okay.
Yeah, product people do hate complexity, and they want to remain with flexibility because generally they relate complex ways of working with lack of flexibility, and then they say, "I want to be able to change things if I discover something that isn't." Relevant. I want to change, and then you cannot change. You need to wait until the next release train. We agreed already what we're going to deliver. Then it starts all the conflicts, and then instead of it's what I say. Instead of doing the work, we start discussing how we do the work, and we just discuss and then we'll get there. But what you are saying, it is something collaborating. Let's say a fair way. Improving decision making, and we are in it together. So let's just get it done together.
And notice that throughout all of this, we did not use the word agile at all, because it's actually not about that.
Yeah,
it's about what will make us successful, given our mission, given our context, the business landscape, the competition, our legacy stack, our everything. what will make us successful. And so maybe in our product, we need to be adaptive, but not terribly adaptive, right? Maybe our space doesn't move wicked fast, maybe. So we can customize our way of working one way. If we do need to be super adaptive and, product can make decisions in a heartbeat, but development needs more time to act on them, we need to balance this somehow. Yeah.
You're right. We do need. So the book is going to help people with the things that are necessary to get the job done. And one thing that connects to me a lot is we're not talking about Agile. We're not talking about doing Scrum better. Because one thing that disturbs me, many people come to me and say, hey, David, how do we do discovery with Scrum? I say, wrong question. It's just, how do we do discovery? That's it. And it doesn't matter if you work with Scrum, Scrumban, Shape Up. How do we learn which problems customers care about that we could create value for both sides? That's the question we need to get busy.
Yes, and so this actually points something out that I definitely see as a pitfall, and that is that people take a set of practices or a process framework or something that kind of comes pre-packaged, and then they kind of try to bend reality to fit it. And really what I advise, and it's one of the earliest strategies described in the book, and it's described in detail, like how you do this, is no, you want to design a way of working for yourself. If it happens to look like Scrum, go for it. But don't start the other way. Okay? Don't just go with the familiar or popular or what you did in your previous company. Instead, start by what will make us successful. Okay? Like, for instance, we constantly talk about flow. And flow makes sense in many contexts, but in some, less so. So should we bend over backwards to create flow, or are there bigger concerns that we need to deal with, such as our people actually don't want to work here? Yes.
Yeah. That's a fair question, because I'm in the game for 15 years now. For sure, you have seen more than me, but for some time of my career, I thought it is about finding the right way of working. And now I think it's all about collaboration and people. And the magic is how we get together and how we find out how to work and create something that matters.
Collaboration is a principle. It's not a practice. So, you can take a practice that goes to extreme, like ensembling, mob programming, right? Or you can say, no, we'll collaborate on like the super risky stuff. That's another choice, right? You can do this in so many different ways. And sometimes your context will make collaboration super hard. One place I was a manager in, we did bioinformatics. Half my team had PhD in biology, and the rest were, they knew software development, but no biology. Collaborating between those two subgroups, that was difficult. So we did it to the extent that it was possible and useful, which wasn't all the time. Not at all. But that's what we needed to have. It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, that's it. And now the leaders watching us, I imagine they have a question. Hey, we just implemented all the best practices, leading practices, and somehow we are not there. What's happening?
Yeah. So like we've improved everything. Why is product development not great yet, right? Yeah. Okay. So I want to offer a few questions that our listeners or audience can think through. One is, are you actively looking at the entire system or optimizing parts? We've talked about that. Another one is, all those practices that you've adopted, are they right for you in your context? And again, context is the people, the tech, the market, AI, whatever, right? The context is everything, okay? Third thing we also talked about is the matter of mindset. So the outcome of your practices depends on mindset. Is yours intentional and explicit and suitable for what you're trying to accomplish here? What often happens, and that goes to the fourth question, is like, are the practices really grafted onto a traditional mindset, or is your way of working actually coherent? Okay, I saw this in over 24 years of doing Agile and consulting and such, that people kind of keep their old mindset and then just graft practices on and expect magic to happen. Well, good luck. And the fifth question is really, what is leadership doing? How they're behaving, what they're saying, what they're not saying, that helps or hinders great product development. Okay? And leadership is really tested in times of trouble, not when everything is great. So when you have a major outage, when your star developer leaves, when your product manager deprioritizes something that you look at it and you just can't explain it. Think back to, what do we do as leaders in the system that makes it happen or prevents such things from happening? And there's so much. I'm just going to give my pet peeve here as an example, and that is if we treat people as resources. You know, I'm sure some of our listeners are going to hear this and say, well, what's he going on about? Resources. It's a word. We know he means people. But when you use that word, it communicates a worldview, right? I have 10 development resources on the project, and I have 2 testing resources on this and whatever. And you're really equating people with their technical skills and not with what they can also provide and how they work with each other and what sets them off and what triggers creativity and all of that. And so you're missing on a whole lot. And everybody reads through this, that they see exactly when they're treated as resources, they know. They know, and those are the places where they don't necessarily want to stay.
I would say this answer is full of golden nuggets. For those watching, just go back and listen to the questions. Because what I admire is that you didn't give them the answers. And because I know why you, well, at least I interpret, you didn't give the answer because you cannot, context matter, but you gave them the questions to reflect and so they can act. And it's amazing because we need to start with the questions. Then from there we can find what will act.
Me and you more coaches than consultants, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, to know which question to ask, and I admire that. So I will for sure get this in the takeaway so people can see these questions. They are very powerful. And what you also say about resources, that is one of the few things that can make me flip, because generally I'm very calm, but I don't like treating people unfairly. And for me, people are not resources. People are people. It's like that. People are people. The other day I was collaborating with someone, and what happened in one of the collaboration, like they put like, how many resources do you have? It's important questions to ask. I said, how many tables you mean? How many computers and so on? What are you asking? No, I want to know how many resources. I said, don't ask about the size of the team. Let's ask about something different. Don't call people resource. It's a word that just sets things in a classic industrialization way that is not how we should treat people. It's not human to call people resources.
So sometimes I take this angle that, it's dehumanizing. Sometimes I know that that's not going to matter to the person who hears that. They just want an answer. But then I can still talk about, well, if you're just asking about headcount, you're probably missing out on a few more things that can affect your results. So you may have 5 people who work super well together, and by that they produce the work of 10 because they have fewer mistakes, they catch each other sooner, all those things. Or you can have 10 people who don't get along and you're going to have to manage them individually, right? Like you're digging a ditch, and then you pay more and you get less. So maybe it's not a resource question, because that just doesn't give you the answers that you need.
Exactly. I worked once with a team, a small team, 5 people, and we worked together for about 2 years. And in these 2 years, we managed to grow the business size like 9-fold. I have never worked with a team like that. We never talked about which process we work. We didn't care about things. We would just figure out work and we would give straight feedback and so on. And this team, I've never seen anything like that. And I worked with different teams, like with 25 people spread in 3 teams. And what happened, I noticed some people would say, hey, don't pair me with this person. I just don't want to work with this person. So you need to think about all of these dynamics that couldn't happen because it would piss someone off. So the question is not about a head count exactly. It is about what is in the system so people can collaborate. And at some point, there will be a case that people don't get along well and you need to make a hard decision.
Yeah. So there is a section in the book actually about words and how they help or hinder our results. So that is one of them. Velocity is another. We're not going to get into that right now. Yeah, there's definitely several. Yes.
Yeah. Velocity is a dangerous one, but let's not get into this one. Yeah, but coming to the end of our chat here, which has loads of valuable insights, I want to ask you if there's something else you want to leave to the audience.
So I'm going to assume that everybody, listening to us is in some leadership position, even if it's at the team level, not the C level, that's totally fine, right? But in a position that really affects the outcomes of people around them. As a leader, you have multiple responsibilities, but there is one that seems to be in the blind spot for a lot of people, and that is to just generally make things better around here, get better at how we do work. And instead, what we just focus on the other responsibilities, which are mostly about execution and just doing more of. But I think that it's a responsibility. It's a well-chosen word. It's not obligation. It's a responsibility of every leader in every organization to make the place better and more successful and more humane, more effective, more efficient. Those few things are not on the equal level. And when you do that, you'll be more personally satisfied. People around you will be more personally satisfied. The work experience will be nicer, and they'll promote you. Yeah. Great
insights. It's the proactiveness of making things better.
Yes.
I like it. Amazing. So, Gil, thanks a lot for being here, sharing all of this wisdom. It is a lecture, I would say, full of value. And I can only recommend for those watching, get the book and you can get more insights for sure. And for those who want to connect with you, how best
please,
people
on LinkedIn,
reach out?
Do it from a computer, not your phone, because then you can put in a note, say, hey, I heard you speak with David, because on the phone you can't do that. Otherwise, there's my website with plenty of stuff people can download and use, some tools, some insights, and so on. And but I would definitely invite a conversation with any listener who wants to, because this is the best part of my work. It's getting to meet so many bright and interesting people who are all different. They're not resources.
Yeah, amazing. All the links will be here, so you'll find all of them. So, everyone, thanks for watching, and let's rock the road together.